Right, namaste everyone, and welcome to another episode of Access of Ideas. And for today's episode, I'm very proud to be joined by Mr. Mukunda Raghavan of Meru Media, who has been working for the past few years, uh, digging a lot about Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, having conversations, deep conversations with people from different backgrounds, different religious identities, and basically trying to uncover what's basically the truth about life and in general what leads to God. And while he does that, he also is a full-time legal consultant with private organizations, and has previously worked as a prosecutor in New York. So thank you so much for joining me today, Mukund. How are you?
Thank you, Satwik. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. And yourself?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
I first came across your content and your channel when you first had your conversation with Sham Sharma. I think a few years back, him, and Vishal had a joint podcast. That's when I basically came across all of you and started following your work on YouTube and Substack and other platforms. So to keep a track of of what's going on. And also it was quite intriguing because up until then I really didn't have much of an idea that overseas Indians were so interested in uncovering their own about their own identity and doing deep research in that. So that's always intrigued me. And when I started doing this podcast, like I was very fortunate to have Sean Binda as my first guest. He was very open about talking about the challenges that the diaspora faces in general in terms of connecting with their identity. So I just wanted to start out by talking a little bit about the intersection of, say, Western and Indian philosophy, like the problem of consciousness, like uh, how the Western studies about like quantum physics are like beginning to echo our own like Vedantic teachings. What has been your finding in that space?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a good question, and it's a complex one for a variety of reasons because I think first, a lot of people, when we talk about quantum, we just don't understand it. Like, I'm not a physicist. I don't really try to talk about quantum anything
Mm-hmm.
because for me, like, I can read, Brian Greene, or I can read, these, various scholars on quantum, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm just getting ideas from them. I'm not sure if I truly understand what they're saying. So
Right.
I think part of the problem is sometimes, and I think a lot of not just Indians and Hindus, but a lot of people do this, is they jump on the science to validate their
Mm-hmm.
their philosophy or their tradition. And I
Right.
think we should keep those kind of separate for a variety of reasons because the science could be true, and it probably
Mm-hmm.
is, but the truth of the tradition is not necessarily the same thing as the truth of science. And they
Correct.
both can be mutually true, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in that sense, like I try not to mix the two, but of
Mm-hmm.
course it happens once in a while because we are talking about similar ideas once,
Yeah.
from here and there. So on the Western side, like again, consciousness is until recently very ill-defined, frankly.
Okay.
When you look at the Western canon, they're not
Mm-hmm.
really concerned with consciousness as consciousness. They're concerned with mind, right? The
Okay.
mind, thoughts, thinking.
Right. Right.
That when for example, Descartes says, je donc et je suis, I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
What he's essentially saying is because I have thoughts, I know that I'm real, right? Like,
Right. Right.
whereas our tradition takes a different perspective. It's
Mm.
not that I have thoughts, it's that I experience. I know that that experience is real, right? So it's a more of a first order function on consciousness from our
Mm-hmm.
side, whereas from the Western side, it's a second order function. It's the derivative of consciousness that they're concerned about, which is the mind.
Okay. So it's basically like physical versus
And recently it's
metaphysical.
changed.
Correct, correct. So it's basically like physical versus metaphysical. The West is more focused with real world challenges, and ours goes a little deeper. Like that, there's more to it than what's just visible to us.
I wouldn't say that. I would say I think a big part of it is the character, the way we talk about something,
Okay.
right? Like when we say consciousness, we're talking
Mm.
about something not necessarily not physical. I mean, because
Hmm.
the Buddhists will say consciousness is physical in the
Right.
sense it's part of this, this entire chain of causation.
Hmm.
And Sankhya will say something like consciousness is something outside of physical, right?
Yes,
The
yes.
Purusha Prakriti dynamic. So it can be physical, but I think the deeper question that our tradition is asking is
Hmm.
is is what is that consciousness? What does it feel like to
Right.
experience that thing? Whereas Whereas the Western tradition, it's really focused on the mind, the
Right.
thought, ration, reason, and like by the way, they take the mind not to be physical, whereas
Okay.
most of our traditions take the mind to be physical, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting enough in that part, in that context, right? In look at Sankhya categories,
Mm-hmm.
you have Buddhi, Mahat, Manas. Manas is a part of pradhana, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of functional of the evolutive prakriti, right? So it's a material thing.
Right. So, what do you think stems from this? Like, as far as like talking about the way the Westerners think about it, like, is it more rooted in the way their scriptures are written, as in religious scriptures? Is it the way the society has uh, evolved over a period of time, say over a millennia or something like that? What do you think that has sort of played its role in that?
Well, of course, I mean, I think here we have to like, if you want to be nuanced about this, part of this is like we have to look at like the Greek tradition, right? Like, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, which is pre-Christian in some sense,
Right.
right? Plato, Aristotle, Parmenides,
Mm-hmm.
Heraclitus, and they have a very different world view than I think the later Christians end up having.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because they weren't they weren't trying to force fit the philosophy into a theological framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot, I'd say a large part of Christian thought, which now becomes is modern thought in some sense, is is Neoplatonism mixed with Jewish apocalyptic theology, and it's interesting there. But
Mm-hmm.
as to your question about whether or not like why this focus on the West in this way, I would say a couple things is that one, there's a lot of Western different traditions in the West. We have
Mm.
to look at
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
traditions we're going to look at, right? And so
Hmm.
it's equivalent of saying all Indian traditions take this perspective. No,
Right.
it's pretty diverse, and the Western traditions are like that too. Like Orthodox Christianity versus Catholic thought is going to be different,
Mm.
versus Protestant thought's different versus like let's say Humean thought, or
Hmm.
is going to be different. I mean, they play on certain agreed upon suppositions around the world, which is number
Hmm.
one, the world out here is real, right? And we're engaging with it in a real way. Whereas the Hindu tradition, Hindu and Buddhist can have positions where the world is not actually functionally real out there.
Hmm.
It's a play of consciousness, right? And which you get later on in the West with this sense of that all everything out there is represented in our mind,
Hmm.
representationalism, things like that. So, I mean, it's complex, but I mean, I don't know if I'm
Yes.
answering your question, but yeah, I don't, yeah, sorry.
No, that's perfectly all right. And just to return to your previous point that you were mentioning about like the Western studies are kind of like beginning to focus towards say our or get close to the way we think as well, the Vedantic philosophy.
Mhm.
I've seen number of like such videos on YouTube as well, like so many discussions these days about like oh, we are living in a simulation, we are living in a simulation.
Yeah.
Well, that's basically what our tradition has been saying for a long time, that Maya and about all that. So it's kind of interesting where it's all slowly converging towards one say form of knowledge, or say converging towards the same knowledge. um it's
Yeah,
interesting.
I mean, look, there's a couple thoughts here. Is one is, you know, if these, one could take the perspective that
Mm,
if there's truth to this, people can discover it across the
mm,
world and across the universe, right? Because it's out there. It's like gravity. Throw something up, it comes out, it exists, right?
mm,
And anyone can learn it. So if the truth is the world is some sort of Maya, Vidya, whatever, then people can over in other traditions discover it too. But the other
right.
position can be like there's a lot of borrowing back and forth, right? And one influences the other. So on this Maya point, like even Plato, Plato primarily in his, the allegory of the cave, addresses some of these points, right? You know, like if you look at it, like the people sitting inside the cave, watching the shadows, thinking that's reality. In
Mm,
fact, it's when they walk outside and feel the sun and experience that, that's the true reality, right? In the same way,
mm,
it's like it's not to say that this world is entirely false. You know, there's elements of truth to it, and
mm,
I think that's existed in the Western traditions for a long time, but it probably wasn't as deeply engaged with as it was in the Eastern tradition with the Hindus and Buddhists, because the Buddhists fundamentally also take that position, right? At some level, this is all like a shimmering, this is glimmer, this is you know, vapidware or vaporware, the world that we see around us in some
mm,
sense.
mm,
It's only in this going inward and recognizing one's true nature. In our sense, it's going to be in the Vedantic sense, it's Atma Brahman, whereas in the Buddhist sense is the nature of no independence of the interdependence of all things, and that nothing, like Madhyamaka was saying, nothing has its own nature, nothing has swabhava, right? So
mm,
it's that recognition of that. So I do think there are parallels between the West and the East, but I think the modern movement to that has shown much more, you know, I guess what's it called, resonance with the Indian thought has really been with the development of neuroscience and with the development of cognitive studies, right? Where
okay.
now we're trying to understand what makes up the mind, what makes up consciousness, what does it mean to be aware, right? The
Mm,
concept of awareness, the way the Indian tradition has talked about this has been unique for 2,000 years until recently.
mm.
Like the West didn't delve into the concept of awareness the way the East did.
Right, right, right. And so, continuing on that same topic of like comparing like Western viewpoints with Eastern viewpoints, how do you see, say, the Western concept of virtue ethics versus the more Indic concept of dharma? Like, are there any real differences, or is it basically the same?
No, I mean, look, so Dharma is complex, right? It's Dharma Sukshama, right? You know, as it says. So it's both a virtue ethics itself, because
Mm,
in some sense Krishna is asking, at least in the Gita is telling Arjuna these qualities of ahimsa, satyam, akrodha, tyaga, all these like these positive qualities, strive for those, right? And
mm,
it's also to those are the virtues, but to strive for those virtues, virtue in an abstract has to collide with the world of our existence, right? At
mm,
some level, and the question is, can the virtue of ahimsa, how does ahimsa as a virtue abstractly play out in the real world, right?
okay.
So one could talk virtue ethics all day and say we have to be
Mm,
virtuous, but what does that mean in the world? So the Gita and the Mahabharata in larger Hindu tradition is accepting virtue ethics as part of
mm,
Dharma, but it
mm,
also has contextual ethics, right? Like how does this particular virtue that we hold lofty, ahimsa paramo dharma, anirshayasam, you know, paramo dharma, these ideas, how do they play out in the world that we live in, right?
mm,
So it's not nonviolence across the board, because even becoming nonviolent, you could cause more violence, right? So in that action of not defending, so the Dharma asks us to grapple, to wrestle with these things,
mm.
and at some sense, it is saying that walk the virtuous path, but in that virtuous path, you're going to sometimes do unvirtuous things, even though they're on the virtuous way, right? You know,
Right.
like so there's this push-pull technique going on here, you know, that I think
Mm,
is deeply not discussed well enough. Some people did. For example, like I'll give you Matilal, you know,
okay.
did fantastic work on studying Hindu ethics, right? And Mohanty too. And there's a few other people that in the Indic world that, you know, authors
Mm, mm,
from like that really talked about this really well.
mm.
Yeah.
I think, like, when you referenced the Bhagavad Gita, and when we talk about dharma and virtue, like, so I mean, that itself presents a very in your face example, because when you talk about virtue, then obviously it's like, no, not killing someone will be regarded as a virtue if you look at the
Mhm.
Western lens, that don't kill. Whereas when you look at from the dharmic lens, you're not killing, you're basically performing your duty. It's your duty as a soldier to uphold dharma, uphold righteousness. So I mean, that's where, when you mention the push pull is happening, it's like both worlds are grappling with that. And we'll come to the issue about Bhagavad Gita later as well, because there was this interesting commentary by Slavoj Žižek, I think, a couple of years
Oh
ago,
yeah.
when Oppenheimer had come, and there was this entire. Uh, I think in India there was this issue that the Bhagavad Gita scripture was being recited when the explosion had taken place, and then there was that scene, that uh, nude scene. So the demand was that, there has to be some sort of censorship. We'll talk about that in a little while. I just wanted
Sure.
to touch upon um, the Nyay, you know, school of logic versus, say, how the Westerners approach truth. Uh, what's your view on that?
What do you mean by that particularly? The Nyaya school of
So,
logic.
being a practicing lawyer, like, how do you view our traditional system of, applying nyaya, like dand and everything, versus how it is viewed or structured in the West?
So Nyaya in so you're not talking about Nyaya Darshana here, right? You're not talking about
Yes,
necessarily.
yes, yes, yes.
Are you or because Nyaya Darshana,
Mm,
in terms of its like epistemology,
mm,
I think is most legal systems would at some level have to accept that, right? Because at any level when you talk about pramanas, right? Lawyers deal with pramanas all the time. That's rules of evidence.
mhm,
Some sense, that is a pramana system of sorts
mm,
that that is derived from philosophical sense, right? Like why should we trust our vision?
mm,
And lawyers, like in trial, you can be like, well, vision actually isn't that trustworthy. What's the lighting condition? What's this? What's that? And then you
mm,
you kind of attack that pramana itself, right? Whether you've actually had that vision, and then you attack things like memory or what not. But when it comes to what I think your question more to the fact is how how is the ancient or the Indian view of law and order compared to the Western view of law
yes,
and order?
yes,
Is that
yes,
right?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So I think so. I've delved somewhat into this, but not like super deep yet.
Mm,
One of the things the problem is the modern world isn't necessarily the same that it was the world, 200, 300, 400 years ago,
mm,
in terms of how we think about the law, right? Or how we think about society. You know, Now it's more secularized. The role of government is become much more bureaucratic, administrative in some
mm,
sense than it is necessarily about the original purpose of government. For example, like the Indian tradition, Bhishma will take the idea of government's role as, the Matsya Nyaya, right? Which is
right.
basically this law of the jungle, as John Locke would say, the what's it called? The state of war. Like this is the state of war, and
Mm,
then you with that the engagement with the people decide to come together, consent to have someone become their ruler or their king or whatever. And
mm,
similarly, that's a social contract that John Locke talks about, that
mm,
people come together. So Bhishma had this idea of a social contract, probably 2,000 years before John Locke, something like that, maybe more than that, but let's
mhm,
just say 2,000. So what is the role of government? And the role of government in this in the Hindu tradition primarily is, by the way, it's funny that Jains and Buddhists don't really have a really strong vision of this. They kind of just adopt the
okay.
Hindu version because
They
for a variety of
branched out
different
of,
reasons.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's also philosophically like they're Shramana paths, right? They don't really care much about the material world, about
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so they don't develop strong ethics around what the purpose of
Right.
governments and so yeah.
Correct, correct, correct. They're more about
So
like
when you get to
enlightenment
this,
and
the Hindu world in the Indian world on yeah, they're more about getting away from, because they want to be break free of samsara at some level,
mm,
which and
mm,
for them in their traditions, it
mm,
requires that one become a bhikkhu or bhikshu or sannyasi of that sort. And it's they have that the people that go to the ashramas versus the regular people, the lay people, where it's
mm,
not that same difference in the Hindu world. But to the point around about government, I think so. Donald Davis wrote this great book. I really enjoyed it. It's about like commerce in medieval India and Dharma Shastra. Like,
Okay.
what is Dharma's role in business law?
Oh, okay.
And it's very fascinating because it is about relationships. Yeah, it's fundamentally about relationships. Dharma at the core of this is about relationships, how to maintain, uphold, and protect relationships between beings, right? Whether it's the relationship between individual and their family, the family to the individual, the family to self, the family to government, government to self. It's all about relationships.
Mm,
How does so rules and laws and everything is built to maintain and produce relationships that lead to the higher good for people, right? And stability. So
what's
I guess it's different in this than our world today, which is a very positivist. It's not about necessarily the outcome of the law. It's that the process is being followed, right?
mm,
It's that we've the process is correct, right? We're
right?
much more focused today in this world on process versus substance. And this is always a dynamic that's
Mm,
playing out.
okay. What's the title of that book that you were talking about?
I'll get it for you again. I don't have the top of my head, but it's like commerce and in medieval India or something like that.
Okay,
I'll
okay.
find the book and
Yeah,
I'll
sure,
send it
sure,
to you.
sure.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Okay, just one more thing. Is my voice
His name is Donald Davis.
okay? Is my voice like audible?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can hear
Okay,
you.
okay. I was just wondering, maybe. Okay, I don't know why I was thinking that. All right. Um, so moving on, so to say stuff like moksha and karma, like how do we translate these concepts that are like that become like digestible to the American uh, culture without, say, kind of losing their essence? How do we do that?
I mean, that's always going to be a problem, right? Like
Mm,
to say dharma is like law or righteousness, or moksha is salvation, right?
mm,
They're going to view it within their lens, but you have to kind of either you can use the term itself and then define it for them,
mm,
or or is the goal to get them to understand the idea more, right? As opposed to being very I guess, focused on the term. And I oscillate between that, by the way. Like, so
okay.
sometimes I will use moksha as salvation, and then
Hmm.
someone will be like, "Oh, in the Christian sense." Well, not necessarily in the Christian sense, because you're not being saved from sin per se or anything like
Hmm.
that. But we can say, for example, there are, especially in the non, let's say Shankara Advaita traditions, moksha does refer to either like a Vaikuntha or Goloka or a Kailasha or a place, or so to speak.
Right.
Even though it's not really a place, but they use this analogy
Correct.
or
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
terms to describe an experience of freedom from bondage, from attachment, from the material world in some sense, right?
Hmm.
So I do say we can use we I do agree somewhat in Rajat Malhotra's about non-translatables, and that's fair.
Hmm.
But my question is always going to be is what's the purpose? And if our purpose is to convey ideas, then sometimes
Hmm.
you're going to have to use translations of words that are not necessarily 100% going to vibe with it because
Hmm.
you're trying to convey things, and something is going to be lost in the translation, but then you have the opportunity in long form conversations to
Hmm.
expand on it and really fill it in.
So, can we like strategize it in a way that, okay, for conveying the message we can use the translated form, but say for long form use we ensure that the actual words don't get lost at all, because
Yeah,
words are eventually words. They, I mean, just like there's this entire rule about like we cannot call Ram as God, we cannot call Krishna as God, we have to call them Lord, because of course there is only one true God, but for us
yeah,
they are Bhagwan. So we can so for us, if we have to reinforce our point, then we should stick to the word like Bhagwan or Ishwar for them. But again, as far as conveying the message is concerned, I get it that okay, we to let them know our ideas, but yeah,
yeah,
we have to ensure that we don't get too consumed in that. And one thing that I that is quite noticeable is that they're very good at consuming. I mean, or digesting other cultures. I don't mean it I don't mean it in a bad way, but I mean there are examples littered across the world of what has happened to stuff like Halloween and
Yeah.
Christmas.
Yeah, but so I've actually my views on this have they change a lot because
Mm,
I do understand the idea of cultural appropriation and
mm, mm, mm,
I find it sometimes to be problematic.
mm,
But I also there's natural syncretic engagement between communities, right?
mm,
Like if I'm in America and I take American values for some things and I do some American practices and I incorporate it together, am I being digesting? I don't know. Sometimes it feels like that we're trying to constantly create enemies or opposition where we don't need to. Yes, in some
okay.
cases, for sure, there are people
Mm,
that consciously go there and be like,
mm,
I want to take this for the
mm,
purposes of converting or, let's say other nefarious purposes from our perspective. And then the other people are just naturally just like they merge together. It's just natural. There's
mm.
no intention.
Right.
And I think that it's complex and I'm sometimes hesitant to pull the trigger on this. I will like for example I will say like when you have Jesus Sahasranama, there's something weird about that, right? Like it just ultimately like you're making up something. It's not like even within your tradition at all. Like
Yeah.
it makes no sense to me.
No.
And there's no like it's not Jewish, it's not Greek, it's not like it's Indian, but you
Mm,
want to make it Christian, and I'm really weirded out by like that. I mean, fine, you can have your budgeons in you could all that stuff is fine, but like
mm.
Jesus Sahasranama, that's just there's not even 1,000 names of Jesus, so how do you make it up? Like it's just Namo Maria Devaya or Putraya, I don't know, like
Yeah.
I guess you could make it up these terms,
Have you have you heard of Yashudi Balle Balle?
I think I have. I think I have.
Yeah, that's not, like Jesus. If you thought Jesus Sahasranama was the cringiest thing that could exist, you have to hear that.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's just cringy to me just because I feel like it's so manufactured. It's not like
yeah, yeah,
it
exactly.
happened
Like
just naturally. Yeah, yeah,
it's just dropped
yeah,
on our head like out of nowhere. Like what's going on? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, So about the same topic, what are your views on yoga? Being there's this sudden wave of against being talked about that oh no yoga is not necessarily Hindu, and we see lots of Western commentators on that oh because it wasn't it wasn't called Hindu Dharma when it all began and then there is this chain of thought thus this cannot be called Hindu and I saw one person. I think is Keshav. He's also like overseas Indian. He had some pretty interesting rebuttal to that. That that's like calling that the sun cannot be called sun because it existed much before it was named sun. So, what are
Yeah.
your views on that?
So I think yoga. So here is always going to be the problem is, let's say you're going to say Buddhist, Jaina, Jivikas, all these Hindus, what we call Hindus today,
Hmm.
they all had yoga, right? They all come from common source, and that
Yes.
source ultimately is going to be in the Dharmic world. So I guess I'm not like you want to call it Buddhist, fine, call it Buddhist. You want to call it Jain, but ultimately it's all dharmic, right? It comes
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
the same, it comes from the same milieu of people, right? You could actually, I think, trace a thorough line from the Rig Veda to the Upanishads into the yoga.
Hmm.
I think you trace it directly. I don't think there's,
Yeah.
or the Vedic canon into yoga, because I think you find this in the Upanishads, right? Very clearly, you find this idea of the what modern yoga, well, not modern yoga, but like Patanjali yoga ends up being, which is this the turning of the yajna into an inward ritual, right?
Right.
This purifying through inwardness, through what the fire, the tejas that arises, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it appears again in the Rig Veda too, in the Nasadiya Suktam. It's also uh, uh, there's the 10th mandala also talks about the tapas as being the the cause of the world creation, that
Mm,
things like that, right? So that tapas, that fire, is what yoga is about, the controlling the inner fire, right? And through the breath sudhana, the various the five breaths that the people engage in, right?
mm,
So I find a thread from the Vedic tradition into yoga. And look, obviously, I think in that same time there is the Shramana tradition that is really ancient. We don't know how far it goes back, but it's parallel with the Vedic, and it might have been part of the Vedic, and the Vedic just becomes later on the more textual variant and the ritualistic variant, as
mm,
opposed to the Shramana, which I think is connected to the Vedic tradition.
mm,
And again, a lot of this is speculation. No one really knows. We're making this up as we go along. Find little clues here and there, and then you put them together to build a narrative.
mm.
Like Johannes Bronkhorst does this, which is greater Magadha. I'm not convinced by it. I don't think he's got very strong position, but fine, fair enough.
Mm. Well, if you were to ask Rahul Gandhi, well, tap obviously means like uh, making your body warm. I don't know where he got that definition from.
Well, I mean, in some sense, it is, right.
In some sense, yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, they talk about like when you're in deep, deep tapas, your
mm,
body sweats in it
yeah,
because
yeah,
there's an inner fire
yeah.
rising, right?
But I think he just took that part and went with it.
Yeah, I don't
So
follow Rahul Gandhi too much. I like to keep some of my brain cells. So
yeah,
yeah,
but we have to like for some sort of entertainment at times, and
yeah, yeah.
but that has its downside.
Well,
We end up burning brain cells as well.
I don't really follow Indian politics that much. It's
Okay,
a
okay,
lot of talking heads.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So while there is this tug of war between Western say ideas and Indic traditions, how do you see
Mhm.
say a kind of struggle between say Indology and the lived experience of Indians itself? Is there like a kind of difference there that there kind of some sort of clash
Of
in that as
course.
well? What's
Yeah, I
your
mean,
observation
so we
about
have to understand that Indology, in some sense, is not reflecting what Hinduism is
it?
at all in any sense, or any of these traditions are. They're
Mm,
reflecting how you can put it into a category in some sense, right?
okay.
Like like these traditions are very fluid, malleable, and they're syncretic. They change. They're dynamic, right?
Mm,
So the Indology perspective is trying to present intellectual categories that are not necessarily incorrect, but they're not real in the same sense that the practice is, right? Like
okay.
our engagement is. So, and a lot of, again, we also have to remember a lot of what Indology does, and a good part of Indology is, originally was philology, which is, language, study of languages and things of that nature. And
Mm,
but today, what I think is it's a lot more um I don't find the scholarship of today to be that great compared to what it was in the past. There's some really good scholarship, but
mm,
again, it's not to say that scholarship is objective on the own. A lot of times it's not. We all have inherent biases, and we should
mm,
accept that, right? Like like Didi Kosambi, or someone like uh, uh, what's his name? Oh, now I'll forget it. RSS Sharma, these guys, right? They come from a Marxist leftist background, so they view
yeah, yeah.
things in that dialectical materialism
Mm,
worldview. You have people today too, like whether, and I think there's truth to be said is if you come from a Christian background and you're still practicing and you view that to be true or whatever,
mm,
is your engagement with the Indian tradition going to be as real, I mean, true to the text as you want it to be, or not? Are you able to put aside your biases and focus? I don't know. I tend to think sometimes not. I mean, and sometimes yes. Even I have my own biases, right? So I would say that I do think focusing on Indology is good to try to understand a good amount of scholarship. And I do think that scholarship is very important. And they do,
mm,
some of this stuff is really good work. And I think it's important for us to engage with
mm,
and learn from. But we also have to be critical about like, hey, you're stepping over the bounds here. You don't have the evidence to make this position. I know you make claims,
mm,
but have you justified those claims? A lot of times what happens is you make a claim in page 10 of your book, and
mm.
by page 200, you've accepted the claim as being true without providing any evidence for it. And this
Oh,
happens pretty frequently.
mm,
You'll start with maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and by the end of the book, it is this, it is that, and then someone else cites you from that position, saying it is this and is that as gospel truth, and I think there's a problem there. That I think ideology does engage with. But again, like I'll say, I think it produced a lot more good
mhm,
in scholarship than it does bad, but there is bad there. And I will say that I think the Indian scholarship milieu, especially coming out of like a lot of these bigger schools. Look,
mm,
there's some good scholars like T.S. Ripley was fantastic. A lot of good Indological scholars coming from Indian schools
mm.
of thought. But I think a good portion of them now that I watch and listen to are trash. They're just not critically think. Like I'll give you an example. I think Ruchika Sharma is a terrible scholar. I think she's horrible. Yeah, maybe she gets some of the facts right, but like like any sort of history or any work is not necessarily about the facts. The facts are important. It's how you weave those facts together and what standards you use to bring in certain facts and accept those facts as being true versus other facts. And I think the narrative weaving that occurs
Mm,
large part in modern Indian scholarship around Hinduism or India or any of this is, first of all, I think it's fundamentally takes a view that Buddhism and Jainism were somehow reactionary to the Hinduism,
mm.
or Hindu caste or Hindu Varna system. Bullshit. I'm sorry. Sorry if I'm not allowed to cuss.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, it's no, that's just not true. It wasn't
Mm,
a reaction to that in particular. It was a reaction to maybe some of the ritualism that was
mm,
coming out and the some of that, but not even that to the full extent. I mean, Buddhism really came out with saying, "Hey, you guys are wrong in your ultimate position." Although he accepted the Vedas and he just didn't
yes.
play, he didn't say anything like, "Oh, it's a Apodoshia." By the way, that concept didn't exist back then anyway. So I would say modern scholars today first take that perspective as like, oh, somehow these are all reform movements.
Mm,
Nonsense. Number two, I think they apply a lot of their Marxist view on history, but they don't do it critically. What I mean by that is they apply it like UC versus non-UC. But what was UC back then was not the same as UC today. Some
mm,
groups are, some groups aren't. There was a lot more dynamism, and you could read that from people like Catherine Blakely, Sumit Guha, who wrote this fantastic book called Beyond Caste.
mhm,
So there's a lot of good scholarship that actually addresses this and gives more nuance. But a lot of these scholars that you find coming out
mm.
of India that I see just play straight into a lot of the same stuff of like um, some of this is colonial stuff, some of this is Marxist viewpoints. The nuance isn't there the way it should be, and they have agendas, right? In some
Mm,
sense, like it's to show that today's world is a product of 2,000 years ago, but no, there's 2,000 years of history between now and 2,000 years ago that led to what it was,
right.
including British, including the Muslim, including local like confrontations and groups and communities.
Mm.
I mean, it's complex. And I think sometimes they try to simplify it to the point of good guy, bad guy, and
Yeah,
I
it's
think the
too much
right
black and
does
white.
something similar too. Yeah, the
Mm,
right does something similar too, as if like there's some great golden age of Indian history that was perfect and there was no caste oppression or there was no Varna Jati
right.
issues. No, that
Right.
always existed. And
Correct.
and
Correct.
and 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 we have to be acceptable. And we also have to be true to the fact that
Mm,
look, the Hindu tradition is diverse. It's very has very diversity of viewpoints. And that
mm,
includes some conservative, some patriarchal, sometimes regressive viewpoints, and sometimes not. The tradition
mm,
itself deals with it. They clash and they fight and they argue and they deal with these issues internally.
mm.
To make it seem like there's one vision of this is I also think a problem.
I think because the Marxists have had such a capture of the academic say institutions, that the right the scholars that are coming from the right currently, they I'm not justifying it, but I think there's a sense of like feeling compelled that we have to portray a very larger than life image
Sure.
of ancient India. Only then we can bring them back, bring pull some of the weight towards us, and then put our thoughts forward. And I mean, you talked about Ruchika Sharma. Well, she comes from the same school of thought of people who write history sitting in their AC offices without ever visiting sites and locations. I remember speaking with Mr. Shashi Hoda in one of my previous episodes, who had done a lot of good work with writing about India and Australia's historical connections, and he
Mhm.
spoke about James Mill, who wrote a book about basically India's history,
Yeah.
sitting in an office in London, without ever having
Yeah.
visited here. And Romila Thapar continued that, basically writing everything about Ayodhya without ever visiting the site. So
But
again,
here's I'll do a pushback here for a couple of
mm,
things. Look, there's different types of scholarship.
mm,
Some of the scholarship is going to be on the ground and people working and doing that work and learning about the land, the soil, the people, and getting
mm,
a much more, I guess, fully immersed
immersed,
perspective.
right?
And there is scholarship in which people
Mm,
sit in the ivory tower, take
mm,
all this data that they get from various locations and write about it. And
mm,
that's fair. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. The problem is like I think taking this particular viewpoint of this is a scholar, Romila Tapar is the highest of all scholars, while the guy doing the field work is not, that's a problem.
right.
But the flip side is I don't think we should be attacking people like there's people that live in India, write about America, write about Europe, right? They
Mm,
don't live there, but they're talking about currents and things that they see. And I think that's
mm,
fair. And I think the issue with people like again, I'll go back to the people like Ruchika
mm,
Sharma. I don't mean to like pick on her, but
yeah,
I guess in this sense I am, is look, your purpose, and by the way, this is, I think, but I do think Roman the Topper is a good scholar. So I disagree with a good number of views, but she's a good scholar.
mm,
But I will say the difference between someone like Roman the Topper and someone like Ruchika Sharma is I think Topper at her very core is trying to figure out what happened, the truth. She
correct.
does have a perspective, she does have
Mm,
bias, it plays out for sure. But
mm,
someone like Ruchika Sharma isn't concerned with the truth so much as
mm,
presenting a viewpoint
right.
so and this is my position also in a lot of the right scholars is
Mm,
they're more concerned about winning the culture war, winning the hearts and minds of people than they are concerned about what is the truth here.
mm,
How are we presenting our views properly? Are we actually capturing what the like the textual sources are trying to say, the historians talking about no, or are we caricaturizing so that we can win? And
mm,
I
mm,
think the problem is at political level, I totally get it. I understand what's going on. It's happening in the U.S. It happens everywhere. But what loses at the end of the day is real good scholarship and
mm,
truth. Yeah, you win numbers, fine, but are you getting to a better place of truth? And I think I'm more concerned with that than I am with winning this battle. And look,
right.
sometimes sometimes I wade into the battle for sure,
Mm,
like I will, but sometimes I'm like, hey, this is maybe not the best use of our intellectual energy, right? Someone like
right.
Jay, Vikram Sampath or Jay Sai Deepak, they're really smart people.
Yeah.
And but I think sometimes like Jay Sai Deepak is so focused on this
Mm,
political aspect that
yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, are we losing the truth here?
Yeah.
And that's I guess my concern.
Yeah, I think, yeah, just going back what I mentioned, it's just the compulsion that there is so
Yeah,
much of narrative that we need to correct. They just feel compelled that we have to do it, and only then we can once we make our voice heard like that. Once we are in the picture, then um, you know maybe then we can think about telling the actual history, digging deep, what you are referring to. But yeah, cultural war right now we are entrenched in that, and it's because there is so much of pull in the left that people are basically trying to bring it back center somewhat. So yeah,
yeah,
because
fair.
I mean they have like. political compulsions. They have to, appeal to a crowd as well at certain stages. So yeah. Um, Talking about like say second generation or say third generation Indian Americans who are
Mhm.
born and raised there, what do you think is would be a good way to ensure that they are able to uh, embrace their roots and continue their cultural legacy going forward while while being good American citizens, but also
Mhm.
being culturally Indian.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. It's a tough question. And I think at some level, like I, if people expect the culture to remain the same, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to change. It's going to change, right? We have to be okay with it changing for the diaspora, however it needs to. We so the question I think that sits with me is what is it that matters to us most, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it, for a large part, Indians, let's say in America and UK, they're very Hindus particularly. Let me just focus on that. Is
Mm-hmm.
they're very super they're they love the culture, the food, the dancing, the music,
Right, 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 right.
that stuff is very I don't want to use the word like, it's what I would say it's the shallow end, right? It's you're wading into the water, you're enjoying it, you're playing,
Mm,
you're splashing and kicking each other, to go into the deep end, it takes a
mm,
little bit of skill,
right.
some swimming, some ability to wade the water to go into like like deeper Hindu rituals or philosophy or mythology. I use the term mythology. Please don't mistake it for
That's
like
okay. That's
saying
okay.
it's false. And what I mean by that is the stories, the truths in these narratives.
Mm,
That takes a little bit of time and effort, and that's much I think more difficult to do. And I think our community
mm,
should is trying to do that more. And some of the ways, by the way, I think the way to do that is we need to be producing better content in terms of mass media. I mean by this is, I take this perspective that maybe
mm.
we should have video games that are talking, and there's some coming out, by the way, that are
Okay.
deeply entrenching themselves in Indian mythology, culture,
Mm,
history, so on. We should have movies that are focused not on just Indian or Hindus being brown, but
mm,
about what is it about Hinduism or Indianness that is important to maintain.
mm.
There's a great one, Namaste Yoga. This Ravi Chand did of last year. I
Okay.
interviewed him last year. It's a great one. You should, if you get a chance about yoga and stuff, it's
Yes.
fantastic,
Mm,
worth watching. And then so more of that kind of stuff I think would be great. And I think that like Vishal, myself, and a few other people talked about this is what does it look like for Hinduism in the diaspora to change, right? Like for example, Hinduism that went to Southeast Asia changed a bit, right?
mm,
Yes, it maintained quite a bit of the agamas, the mythology, even some of the social system, but
mm,
it shifted, it morphed in Southeast Asia like it should here. I don't know how that will look. I think
mm,
I think it'll be somewhat like it'll be a mix of high philosophy
mm.
and some ritual practice.
Right.
And not necessarily temple ritual, but it might be home ritual, it might be communal. Maybe it's going to be like people getting together, doing satsang, singing,
Right. Right.
dancing, doing that kind of stuff, which is happening right away. You're seeing like these Jahnavi Harrison and all these kirtan stuff happening, which is
Mm, mm,
becoming a
mm,
new way to think about, how do you engage spiritually? And I think that's fair. Like it is connected to kirtan as a means as a sadhana, but it's
mm.
become more popularized and bringing in people that way, which I think is fine. Yeah.
Okay. Because I got curious about this because during my previous interaction with Dr. Satish Rai, he's like a Fiji Indian, and he's like a
Uh-huh.
direct descendant of the Girbit community who were like indentured labor, taken or shipped to the various locations. Uh, what I found or what I learned from him is that the Indians who were shipped out, they made it a point to carry books like Ramayana and Mahabharata with them,
Mhm.
and because they had with them all the time, so they were able to stay connected with their roots even thousands of miles away. So that's what I was thinking, that maybe some sort of introduction to these religious texts or stories, on a frequent basis with kids at an interactive
Mhm.
level, that can get them engaged into these stories. We can help continue the legacy of Sanatan Dharma even while staying abroad.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I think something we all have to recognize is books are great for adults, they're not good for kids. Kids, especially
That's
in the
what I said,
modern age, right?
interactive manner in some way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is why I'm saying like games
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and stories, like even if you think about it historically, like the books are for preservation
Hmm.
and for maintenance and then to be able to travel, right? But
Right.
because you could take a book, you don't have to take a person. You could take 5 books, you don't have to take five people.
Hmm.
So in that sense, we all grew up with storytelling, speech,
Hmm.
someone telling us these stories. It's telling us a story of Hanuman or Rama
Hmm.
or Narasimha or Shiva, we
Hmm.
hear the stories, and that's how we best are able to culturally first connect to it, right? And I think this
Hmm.
is where, you know, I don't know how, frankly, I don't know how often it's happening in the diaspora community, these stories being told. They usually
Hmm.
get told nowadays, I think, in like Balavihar or the temple, or maybe
Yes,
now
yes.
even with Mahavatar Narasimha, the movie, which I thought was actually really great.
Hmm.
So things like that, I think, will be really help people connect. And then
Hmm.
and then as they get older, I think the next stage is being able to explain what these stories mean, right? Or
Yes.
yeah, and I think that part is sorely lacking in the diaspora community. Like, why is the Mahabharata interesting? What makes it? Is it just a story? Is it just like why is the concept of let's say Draupadi Vastaharan, right? Why is that like worth talking about, right?
Hmm.
What does the dialogue say? How does Draupadi interact with this entire subha of males, gazing
Hmm.
upon her and then and objectifying her? How does she respond to that? And why are these men silent? Why is Bhishma
Hmm.
silent? Why is Drona silent? What is the play of power here? What is the play of Dharma playing out? Why is it Krishna is the one that has to save her, not her husband? What's
Hmm.
going on here, right? So that drama that plays out, it's dramatic. It's like an Indian serial where someone gets slapped, you get 20 different angles, right? The Mahabharata, in
Right.
that sense, is the original Indian serial because it's giving you all the angles, but from a
Correct.
narrative perspective, right?
Correct. Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, even Mahabharata has so many different versions of it from different perspectives. There's the Mahabharata
Oh yeah.
from Bhim's perspective, and so many other characters. Yeah. So and interesting that you brought up the point about being able to explain what our stories mean and what our texts mean. And I want to go
Yeah.
back to one of our earlier points, what we're talking about Bhagavad Gita and the entire say minor controversy that had erupted. And
Uh-huh.
uh, there was this interview of Slavoj Zizek, which I might probably mispronouncing his name, but his interview was with Piers Morgan on his uncensored. Was it? That's the name of his show, right? Uh,
I believe so, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So they were basically discussing about this particular situation, that there's this scene in the Oppenheimer movie where Robert Oppenheimer is quoting from the Bhagavad Gita, and then there is that scene with the actress, and
Yeah.
the entire objection that there is nudity, so this needs to be covered up and everything. So he goes on a rant. Slavo goes on a rant that, actually it's the other way around, that uh, the purity of the sex should be there, and the evil Bhagavad Gita shouldn't be there. And why is Bhagavad Gita evil? Because um, Himmler got inspired by the Bhagavad Gita. And I was like,
Right.
what is this? What is this black and white analogy? Just because some lunatic
Yeah.
Nazi got inspired, and we don't even know if he actually got inspired by that. So
Uh yeah. So okay, so here are a couple thoughts. First, I think one, okay, so I haven't seen Oppenheimer, by the way, so I don't know. I haven't seen the scene.
okay.
So I've heard people talking about this. I should watch it at some point, but I haven't, right? So I think Slavo, first of all, he doesn't seem to understand Indian text at all. He's taught. He's very, very. He's first of all, he's a dialectical materialist, which means he inherently looks for these internal contradictions in text, which is fine. But the nature of the Gita, the nature of Mahabharata itself, is a play between two extremes, and the workout between those two things, right? Always. Um, so I think his one of his problems, I think he thinks that Krishna is essentially telling Arjuna in the text to be like detached action he thinks is like evil, right? Slavo does because it says it lets people kill whoever they want and behave however they want. And look, there is truth to that. If you do not have the guardrails that Krishna also puts on it. He's not saying just go act in the world with that attachment, just do
Yeah.
whatever you want. No, dharmic action. What is
Yeah.
dharmic action
Correct.
here?
Correct.
All right. And then, so now you read things like, like I said earlier, ahimsa, satyam, akroha, tyaga, shanti, rupeshanam,
Yes.
daya, bhuteshu. So all these lists of the Deva Sampati in chapter
Mm-hmm.
16, right? What is this the prajna? Someone who sees a friend full equally, who sees one and all. So it's as if he chooses one line and then uses that entire thing to justify what he
Yeah.
wants to take.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like this is the problem when like even Audrey Husky said something like this 2 years ago, and it's just nonsensical drivel, right? Like at the end of
Yeah.
the day, it's like the Mahabharata's entire purpose, if you actually look at it, is to say violence is bad. Whatever you do, this Mahabharata war, even for Dharma, is going to, yes, it's going to lead to dharmic good. But Dharma here in this case is Krishna's Dharma. His cosmic role, which is to
Right.
clear the earth, unburden the earth, right? But the earth, when it gets unburdened, leaves a state of disunity, of loss, of pain, right? And
Mm.
ultimately, the story is about violence begets violence, no matter how you do it. You still
Right.
might have to do violence, but do not for 1 second think that violence is, but in and of itself, the goal, the end, or the one that's going to solve this problem. Because the entire Shanti Parva, Anushasana Parva afterwards is
Yeah.
Yudhishthira dealing with the consequences
Correct.
of
Correct. Correct.
violence, right? It's not
Yeah.
simply like, oh, just go kill and then go enjoy your life. No, no.
No.
It's all causal chain. It's you have to focus on this stuff. And Slavo, again, is just like this is the problem. Is like he'll
Mm.
take something stupid in his I think stupid in his perspective, which is like
Mm.
he'll compare Christianity to Paul, the Christian Paul of Tarsus, Saul of Tarsus, to Krishna's view of, and I think he thinks that Christianity pushes people to be a certain way, but Christianity doesn't provide the tools to live in the world and be of the world
Mm.
in any true sense, the way that Krishna's viewpoint does. Krishna really is saying in this action of what we're doing, like, yes, sometimes you're going to have to do bad things to make good things happen, but you
Mm.
have to be able to deal with the consequences of that, number one. And number two is be comforted in that what you're doing is correct. And it's
Right.
going to be so, but you can use Himmler can use it, in which he did, but I mean, we can't control that. It's the equivalent of me saying, the serial killer, cites a Bible verse every single
Yeah.
time he kills someone. Therefore,
Exactly.
the Bible. No, it's
Yeah.
not. It's a weird argument.
So, and we have the exact scene from Pulp Fiction where the character of
Yeah,
getting his name, he basically quotes Ezekiel what it was before shooting people. So now we can say that hey, Bible promotes violence.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think some of these scholars do this like out of just pure spite, like it is my personal view.
Well, I also think he's a provocateur. So I
Yeah.
don't know what he actually thinks about this stuff. I haven't
Mm,
read his work. I saw that clip, and
mm,
he says a lot of things. I don't think he may necessarily mean it. I think he said it to
mm.
get a reaction. But
Yeah, yeah,
again, it's like I don't know. And maybe I should read him, but I don't really care enough to read Slavo
you're
Zizek.
right.
So I mean, yeah.
Mm. Just one last question. We were just speaking about like continuing, our traditions and legacy for and enabling our our succeeding generations to take it forward. Just one question out of curiosity. Um, what is the state of, say, native languages being spoken in Indian American households? Say,
Oh,
Tamil Indian Americans, Telugu Indian Americans. I'm asking this simply because there is often like a language war here in India. I mean,
mm,
those fights happen clearly out of political concerns that somebody wants to rile up their voter base to get some votes and stuff. But it happens. It happens
sure.
quite often, and it often say manipulates the minds of a lot of general people in general, who are unsuspecting people and who end up getting in online debates and stuff like that. Oh, you have to speak Marathi in Maharashtra. Oh, you cannot have any other language signboards in Karnataka, in metro, and anything like that. I'm just curious, just out of that, like, what is the state of say preserving language within the overseas Indian communities? uh,
Yeah, I think the generation coming from India to US preserves it pretty well with their children.
mhm.
Um, I think my generation doesn't.
Okay.
So, meaning like we might have learned it from my parents, our parents. Many of us don't speak it. I speak it. Like for
Mm,
example, I have cousins or people that don't. They understand it. They don't speak it. And then their children, of course, don't speak it.
mm,
So at some level, yeah, it does die out. Like that's the truth, and especially when you get to like when you have interracial marriages,
mm.
interregional marriages. Like someone say
Right.
someone from Maharashtra marries someone from Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you don't both speak, Marathi or Tamil, you use English primarily, and
Right.
then so some of that is lost in over time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. But do you think that it would help in any way if languages are also preserved? Because ultimately, again, it's words which have actual rooted native meaning, which can then carry forward.
Yeah, look, I think language is vitally important.
Mm,
It's one of the reasons I speak Hindi and Tamil and a couple of
mm,
European languages. But like for me, it gives you insight into a whole new world.
mm.
Like when you speak Tamil, your brain behaves differently, or speak Hindi, your brain behaves differently. Words have a different impact and meaning. Like
Yes.
then you watch a movie in that native language without subtitles, and you see the difference in what they're, like as when you watch a subtitle one, like how do you like in Tamil you would say macha, how would they say it there?
Mm.
Does it mean, friend? No, it means something different than just simply
Right. Right. Right.
friend, right?
Right.
So these the so what I'm saying is, yeah, language is vitally important, and
Mm,
but this is also like how when you get globalized and you become to new places, if you're not insular, if you're not
mm,
insulated, like for example, a lot of communities, like
mm.
Hispanics, Vietnamese, Chinese, they have their own in, community that they live and work
Ghettos.
within, and they'll maintain that, right? Yeah,
Mm,
I
mm,
mean, you can
mm,
call it a ghetto, but not, but you have these enclaves,
mm, mm,
um,
mm, mm.
and then so they maintain that language, like, and Indians because of our, I guess I mean, there are little India towns. I guess if you go to San Jose, you'll see,
Mm.
or the Bay Area, it's going to be like little India parts of it. And people there would speak Tamil and whatever. But again, that's also because there's a huge influx of first gens,
Right.
coming from India.
Mm.
The second gens is a little tougher. Yeah.
Okay. So, just out of curiosity, one more question. Like, how do, say, second or third
No, take your
generation
time, whatever you got.
uh, how do, say, second or third generation Indian Americans view a newly arrived Indian when they reach there for their job or whatever?
Yeah.
Is there like, are they like, do they reach out to them out of curiosity? They want to connect with them, knowing, wanting to know something about the motherland or stuff like that.
Yeah. So I am very interested. I don't know how much others are.
Mhm.
I mean, I can't speak to that just because. Um, like I lived in India myself, right? I think I'm one of the few second gens I know
Mhm.
that went and spent time and lived in India and actually like twice, like in college I spent a year there and then and then later on in my life, I lived there for a couple of years.
Mm,
And I keep regular touch with India, and so there's something I think I like meeting, people from India in different parts, and it's connecting to me.
mm,
I don't know how other people react because I know a lot of people, aside from their own family, I don't know if there's any deep desire for them to know more about India outside of, hey, let's take my kids for vacation
okay.
and go to see Taj Mahal, this, that, whatever,
Mm,
and see our family. I'm not really sure how deeply people are intertwined with it.
okay.
And maybe you don't have to be. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
I'm
just
just
am.
so
I,
curious
I I
about
like going back and
it. Hmm.
seeing all that stuff. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah, I get it.
I have a couple of friends who are like currently living there. One is currently in Dallas. Another is in Delaware. And like whenever we meet, we have a lot of conversation. But this is one question I always miss out on asking. So I just I took this opportunity to speak through you. All right. I think well we
Yeah,
have
no,
covered.
thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. We covered quite a number of interesting points, and thank you so much for your time, Mukundaji. I hope we get to connect again sometime. Am I audible?
Yeah, this is great, Satvik. Anytime you want, I enjoyed this. It was a good conversation. It was great to meet you, and
Yeah,
I wish you the best, and it's
same to you.
great work, man. Awesome.
Thank you. All right, then. Have a great weekend ahead. Goodbye.
Thank you.